In this video, you will learn about the three main uses of the dative case in New Testament Greek. Hi, Rob McIver here. Let's talk about the dative case and do some serious thinking about how to make it easier to understand for beginners. Well, as you can see from the graph here, the dative case is not used as often as the other cases, well, except for the vocative. But it still has some very important uses, and we're going to talk about three of them in this video. On second declension masculine nouns like logos, the dative case singular is indicated with an omega with an iota subscript. The iota subscript is a bit of a clue that we've got a dative case in second declension nouns and even first declension nouns. In the plural, it has the ending ois. Now, the first major use of the dative case that we're going to consider is with certain prepositions. In fact, there is one preposition it is found with a great deal, and that is the preposition en. It means in, and here are the statistics. En is used 3,127 times in the Greek New Testament, and every time with the dative case. In fact, of all the uses of the dative, en accounts for 38% of them. So this is a big use of the dative case, and you've got to admit it's fairly straightforward. Here are some examples just taken from the New Testament. En to nomo from Matthew 12, in the law. En to cosmoi, in the world or in the cosmos. En to huio, in the sun, believe in the sun. En to leo, well, you could say in the people, but you will find it translated most often as among the people. The English idiom isn't quite the same as the Greek idiom. And en tois logos, in the words. Before we start the next slide, I need to talk to you about one of the unfortunate things about learning a language. Everything begins to make sense and you get it all together, and then suddenly something new is presented, and even what you were confident about seems to just fall apart, and it takes a while to reintegrate things. Now, I hope your experience is not like the experience of many of my students. They find that they begin their Greek class, and it's not too bad. They learn the alphabet, they learn how to use the Greek polytonic keyboard, they've learned what a verb is, they do subjects and direct objects, and even the genitive case. It's okay, it's fast, but it all just hangs together. And then suddenly, for some reason, indirect objects, and we're about to talk about them, makes it all seem difficult again. Now, I've got some good news. I do need to talk to you about indirect objects, and you can come back and listen to that as often as you like. And then I'm going to show you another slide, which will say, well, here is indirect objects light. Here's the easy bit to understand, and start here, and gradually the rest will make sense. Okay, so let's look at the next slide. Second use of the dative case is to express indirect objects. Now, our custom is to talk about what a grammatical feature is in English, and then say, does this help us understand the Greek grammatical feature? Well, with indirect objects, they are relatively close. Take the sentence. God speaks words to the people. God, subject, speaks, verb, words, direct object, to the people, indirect object. I give bread to the slave. I, subject, give, verb, bread, direct object, to the slave, indirect object. You can see an indirect object is expressed with to or for in English. Although don't get carried away with that, because to and for are used for other things in English besides expressing indirect objects. And I've placed the equivalent Greek there for you to look at. You have all the words for the first sentence. The word didomi is a word that will crop up later when we talk about me verbs and the aorist tense. We just need to have a verb for giving, and that's the verb for giving. All right, so that is indirect objects in both English and Greek. The thing about indirect objects in Greek is they use the dative case to indicate they are the indirect object, and the accusative case to indicate that they are the direct object. So in the first sentence, ho theos, God, legai, speaks, logus, to, leo. Notice the iota subscript, which is the clue that it's a dative case for the second declension noun, leos. So the dative case indicates that to leo is the indirect object. Didomi, arton, to doulo. To doulo is in the dative case. It's of the noun doulos, second declension masculine noun. Omega with an iota subscript indicates a dative case, and the dative case itself is indicating that it is the indirect object. So the bread is the direct object, the servant is the indirect object. All right. Well, as I say, you can listen to that several times. But even though it sounds a little bit complicated, what you need to know at this stage is a much smaller subset. So here is the big clue that makes indirect objects much easier to understand. Almost all of the indirect objects in the Greek New Testament are found associated with verbs of saying and giving. Verbs of saying like lego and laleo, and verbs of giving like didomi. In fact, if you take the dative cases associated with the verbs lego, laleo, and didomi, they account for a whole 23% of all the dative cases used in the New Testament. Now, there are other indirect objects which you will come across from time to time, but I suggest you start by looking out for indirect objects associated with verbs of saying and giving, and then the other ones will begin to make sense gradually. Let's talk about some examples of how an indirect object might look in the New Testament. Legai, to, anthropo. That's found in Matthew 12. And as you can see, it's easy to translate. He said to the man. Legai, tois, doulos. He said to the slaves. Legai, to, petro. He said to Peter. So it makes sense. It's easy to translate. We just say, oh, that's in the dative case, and it's a verb of saying. Therefore, it must be an indirect object. The third use of the dative case we're going to talk about is much less common than the other two, and that is the dative that follows certain verbs. Verbs like pisteuo, akalutheo, and proskuneo are all followed by the dative case. Pisteuo means I believe, akalutheo means I follow, and proskuneo means I worship. Now, there are many examples of these in the New Testament. Together they form about 2% of the uses of the dative in the New Testament. I could only give you one example with the grammar and vocabulary that you know at the moment, and that is found in John 2:22. Episteusan to logo. They believed the word. Most of the other uses are tied up with such expressions as he, she, or they believed in him, or the command, believe in me, or the command, follow me, or the command, worship him. So you need to know about the mood for commands, which is the imperative mood, and about pronouns before I can give you some examples of those. But in this chapter, I wanted to include most of the things you need to know about the dative case in a beginning New Testament Greek course in the one chapter, so you can come back to it and refer to it from time to time. Now that we've met the three main uses of the dative case in the New Testament, perhaps it's time to start thinking about how to make it easier to understand the dative case. Well, I have several tips for you, and the first one I think you'll smile at. It is don't panic. All right, you might be one of those people that immediately understand what an indirect object is. Well, okay, you probably wouldn't panic in any event. But if you're still struggling, Let me just reassure you, it'll eventually come together. My second tip is that you should stick to what makes sense to you. So there are some easy things with the dative case. For example, en, meaning in, is followed by a dative, and it's easy. Indirect objects might be a little bit challenging to understand, but if you concentrate on verbs of saying like lego and giving like didomi, you will find that they make sense. When you come to a sentence where Jesus says to Peter, it will just naturally translate for you, and you'll see that to Peter is in the dative case, and you'll say, that's an indirect object. Another tip is to remember to learn your vocabulary thoroughly and also your declensions thoroughly. That way you won't have to spend time thinking, well, what does the word mean? And yes, this is, is it yes, it's a dative case, and what does dative case mean? The more you are comfortable with your vocabulary and your declensions, the easier everything else is going to be. And as usual, practice is going to help a great deal. Here is an exercise found in chapter 5 of my book, Beginning New Testament Greek Made Easier, which will give practice using genitives and datives. This video is part of a series of videos, all dealing with second declension nouns. You can most easily find these videos by subscribing to my YouTube channel, NT Greek Made Easier, or by following me on x.com at McIver 2024. And hey, if you found this video helpful, why not let me know by clicking on the like button below or by clicking on the heart icon. Thank you.